welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. You know, something I've come to appreciate about the guests that I have on the show is how different we often tend to do things in business, from the ways we value our time, to the nonlinear paths we walk, to the differing ways that we charge for our services, to the contrasting ways of how we earn an income. I've had guests on the show who pursue the FIRE movement, financial independence and retiring early, to those who travel the world for free, to today's guests who does something that I had never heard about, but she said she didn't coin, called taking mini retirements. And she's taken over a dozen of them during her career. And I'm so excited to dig into this topic today with my guest on the show, Jillian Johnsrud. I was connected to Jillian by a friend and former guest on the show, Brandon Clark. They walk in similar industries. And Brandon thought that I would just really enjoy Jillian's story and her energy, and he could not have been more right. From our first connection call, I just completely felt this values alignment and just deep, meaningful connection with Jillian. And I'm sure you will be able to sense it on today's conversation. So on the show today, we are going to dig into this topic of mini retirement and what does it even mean and how this can look, whether you may work in a 9-to-5 or if you're a business owner. And just so you know, Jillian defines a mini retirement as taking a break from your work for at least a month. So let's just set that precedent while we're at it. We explore the different ways a mini retirement can give you a runway to imagine new possibilities for your life, for your career, potentially heal from burnout, and buy back some of your time. We're also going to talk about Jillian's journey supporting her clients in preparing for their own mini retirements, as well as some of the real tangible steps that you need to put in place in case you're considering this for yourself. I'm really excited to dig into this topic today. It feels completely new and something I had never even considered for myself before. So I hope that you'll enjoy as both you and I learn together about what a mini retirement even is. So before we dive into today's conversation, I want to share with you a little bit more about our guest. Jillian started her financial journey at 19 with $55,000 of debt. She and her husband, Adam, they didn't have high-earning jobs, but they still had big dreams. They wanted to be able to retire often and take mini retirements to travel the world, adopt kids, and have financial freedom. Over the past 20 years, they have taken a dozen of mini retirements. It took over a decade to pay off their debt, pay cash for their home, adopt 4 kids, and have 2 of their own, buy rentals, travel to 27 countries, and live abroad. At 32, Jillian became financially independent. She and Adam left their full-time jobs. They live in Kalispell, Montana, near Glacier National Park, with their 5 kids. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to share just 2 opportunities to spend a little more time with yours truly if you're looking for a means to do so. You can come join us for our upcoming non-networking power hour on Monday, July 15th. It's a really great opportunity to spend some meaningful time with other like-minded empathpreneurs and get supported in a really safe and generous and just awesome connecting space. And you can come join us in our online community. The link is in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. And with that, let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Hi, Jillian. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm delighted to have you on. When we had our first connection call, I didn't have a lot of context for our conversation because we were introduced via a mutual friend who I always trust kind of those connections when they're like, I think you two are really going to get along. And I came away from our last conversation, first of all, feeling more grounded, which is always a great sign for me, and inspired. So thrilled to have you on today. And I know we're going to talk about mini retirements, and I'm assigning this term as something that's your key term because I have never heard of it before. So I'm excited to dig into this topic. And before we do, as a way of introducing yourself, I'd love for you to share your pronouns, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story because I think that we all learn and connect through stories.
Yeah. So my pronouns are she, her. And my story kind of began, especially around mini retirements, shortly after we got married. We had a lot of debt. We had like $55,000 of debt, and we didn't go into high earning kind of career paths. And so I never thought we'd be able to retire early. I would have been really excited if we would have hit financial independence by like 60. So mini retirements were kind of the path forward. There were a lot of other things in our lives that were important to us, and I knew I wanted to carve out time for, and I wanted to really be able to lean into those things. So over the last 22 years, we've done a dozen of them. And along the way, we were able to travel to like 27 different countries and have 6 kids and do a bunch of fun stuff. So it's been a good journey.
You are the perfect person for me to be talking about as I navigate this 2.5-week baby moon where I'm still like, where am I going to go? So perfectly timed. Thank you very much, universe. So let's start from the top because I would really love for you to define what a mini retirement even means. I've never heard of this term before. I'm curious if it's a term in the Financial Independence Retire Early movement, for those who don't know the acronym, or if it's your own.
I don't believe it's my own. I think it's been around for a long time, and it can go by lots of different names. And I'm actually not really partial to any particular one. Some people refer to them as career breaks or sabbaticals or gap years or hiatus. But whatever you call it, I define it as a month or longer, stepping away from your 9 to 5 to focus on something that matters to you.
I really appreciate the qualifiers. So a month away, mm-hmm. And it's fully stepping away from your 9 to 5.
I prefer that, but if you have a 9 to 5, but for business owners, I actually think it's a little bit more logistically challenging and almost a little bit more stressful to entirely step away. So especially for a business owner, their first or second or even third mini retirement, it can make a lot more sense to shrink your work down to like 10% versus trying to go all the way to 0. Trying to get that last 10% is a lot of logistical work, and it feels risky. And that feeling of risk, isn't kind of outweighed by the benefit of having 0 work hours. So for self-employed, I think shrinking it down to maybe 10% your average hours, you can still get 90% of the benefits of the mini retirement with a lot less effort.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what the inspiration for your first mini retirement was, and how did you go about creating it?
Yeah. So, like I said, we've done a dozen, and honestly, all of them have been really different. And I always encourage people to kind of pick a focus or a theme, like what's one or two objectives for their mini retirement, and kind of lean into that versus like, I'm going to do 20 entirely different things that maybe don't have a lot of, synergy between them. My first one was born out of a hard situation. Um, I, I was pregnant for the first time and I miscarried. And for a lot of people, a miscarry is like a blip and they move on with their lives and, it's fine. I was not fine. I was not fine at all. I like imploded. It was basically a lifetime of trauma that I had been repressing. And this kind of broke the dam open. And so I asked for a month off, and my employer, seeing that like I was a mess, was like, yes, please leave, go fix yourself, and then come back here when you're better, because we can't handle this either. And so my best friend and I, we took a month and we traveled from DC to Seattle and back, and we car camped and we stayed in a tent and we stayed with friends and family and we did national parks, and it helped heal my heart. It was like exactly what I needed in that moment.
And so that was really born out of a personal moment of grief and healing. I'm curious how, if any more of those mini retirements were taken from that similar place, and at what point did they start becoming right moments of adventure and joy and more empowering objectives for stepping away?
I know the first one started on kind of a dark note.
For you and for many of us, though, right? Like, just to normalize that experience, I think that's how many of us start moments of big pivots in our careers and life.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of different ones, a lot of travel focused, a lot of kind of ones focused on quality time with our kids and adventure. We have a camper and we travel around the country for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months at a time, exploring different areas and homeschooling our kids. But we've used them for lots of different things. One summer I took the summer off and I planted a food forest in my backyard, like 20 fruit trees and like 100 berry bushes, and kind of went all in on that. This last one, I really focused on my health and figuring out, now I'm 41 and I'm at the age where I'm like, oh, I need to like figure out actually how to take care of myself. Like it's time to be a grown up and like figure this thing out, because what worked at 20 is not working as well for all areas of my health. And being able to step away, I always encourage people, when we think about that focus of a mini retirement, what are things that you need more mental or emotional bandwidth to really focus on? Or what are things that just don't fit in the weekends? They don't fit in a 2 weeks vacation or a week-long vacation. Are there things in your life that if you're like, man, if I had a month, I could really make a lot of progress on that, whether it's rest, recovering from burnout, your health, adventure, any of it.
Do you notice that many of the folks that you work with who are wanting to take a mini retirement from one job want to take it so that they can focus on another job? And what's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, a mini retirement can be a great way to give yourself some runway in a business. If you have something that's kind of been on the back burner, or you've been trying to build in nights and weekends, and you think, if I just had a month or 3 months or 6 months, if I could buy myself 6 months of time, then I could scale this up to where maybe it could be my full-time income. But if you just keep doing it on nights and weekends, that might take 2 or 3 years. And so, with a business, it can go either way. Sometimes it's a good time to explore options, especially if you've been working at a job where it's taken all of your mental and emotional bandwidth and you're so burned out, you can't even imagine what else you might like to do. You can use that you can use that mini retirement to recover from burnout and really start to imagine new possibilities. But it's extra useful, I think, if you have something started on the side, if you have a tiny bit of traction and you want to scale something up to kind of buy yourself that runway.
So, something I really appreciate in my business as a coach is that many of us who are wanting more time is often the thing that we perceive as ourselves not having. So, I think something I'm hearing you say is that many people are excited about mini retirements to gain more time
Mhm.
in order to bring something to life. And time may be the same thing that gets in the way of their having the perhaps capacity or spaciousness to plan for that mini retirement. So
Mhm.
when you support someone in planning for a mini retirement, and specifically let's use time as an example because I think that this is a particularly sticky subject. How do you approach that conversation with your clients and really preparing themselves to take the time when they seemingly may not have it, or may lack the resources, or the energy, or.
Mhm. Yeah. I see this. It's funny. We just wrapped up a group coaching of just people who are doing mini retirements. And I did intro calls before they started. And all of them were concerned about how much time is this going to take? What am I signing myself up for? Like, what's the commitment? Because they're all overworked. They're all busy professionals. They all feel stretched so thin, which is why they want a mini retirement. So I think it's important if you're in that spot. Yes, you need to carve out a little bit of space to plan and to kind of get this organized and get ready for it, but also being realistic that, when I create programs or workbooks, I know they don't have 30 hours to do this. Like, I know it has to be really succinct and just picking the things that are very high leverage and will get them what they need without too much additional overwhelm. Because they typically want a break because they already feel overwhelmed. So focusing on a few things, I always encourage people, if you can, to try to get out of your house. Even one night in a hotel can give you enough breathing space to start to think through this and to start to plan it. And that small investment up front can make that time off so much more meaningful and impactful and productive.
I certainly appreciate that. That's something that I often recommend clients and do myself as well, like these quarterly retreats to really get away, reflect on the learnings, the insights from the past quarter, and even just to have that physical and environmental space from some of those common day stressors to connect with my visions and dreams for what's coming up, for what's next. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the timeline because I'm wondering if there's a best practice that you've seen around how much time someone should give themselves to prepare for taking a mini retreat.
Mhm. Do you mean for before the mini retirement?
Yes,
Yeah.
before the mini retirement, which sounds like an extended retreat.
Yeah. I usually start working with people 3 to 6 months before, especially depending on how busy they are and how much kind of bandwidth they have. I know that that time and that focus is their most scarce resource, and so giving yourself a longer runway. Um, and honestly, for a lot of people, just starting to ask themselves the question, even if they don't have a lot of time to finish the question, it helps kind of open that loop. And I see like a lot of kind of work get done between the work. just in presenting the questions and the ideas, it slowly filters in over the next week or two, and people come back with more insight than maybe we even accomplished during the call. So ideally 3 to 6 months, but honestly, sometimes things pop up and they're unexpected, good things, bad things, people get laid off, or, someone gets sick and you're going to have this extended time off. As soon as you can would be my encouragement. If you're like, oh, unexpectedly laid off, get started and dedicate, the first week to coming up with that plan. But I do always encourage people. I have this idea of like a mini retirement go bag. If you like the idea of a mini retirement, to kind of plan out a few scenarios. What would be the goal? What would you do? What would be the budget? And to kind of have those ready, because when unexpected things happen, it's oftentimes the hardest moment to pivot and to be like, okay, what good can come of this, and how can I, leverage this for something positive in my life? Where if you're like, wait, I think I have some notes somewhere, and you pull out a folder that you did 2 years before, and you have, 6 or 7 different scenarios of what you can do. It's much easier to kind of get going on one of those ideas.
I really appreciate this conversation through the lens of catalyzing change. A quote that I use in my work a lot is by Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith, who says, "The fear pushes until the vision pulls." And I think when we're approaching big change in our lives, we can often be pushed by moments of fear, whether it's the passing of a loved one, or burnout, which is one I hear mentioned on the podcast so often, or moments of grief, or layoffs, or career pivots. And then being pulled by a vision, right? Just this dream that has been compelling us forward, or just something we've craved. And I guess I'm curious, from your perspective and from the clients that you've supported over the years, like how many of those folks approaching or seeking a mini retirement are overcoming a fear or a pain point versus being compelled by a vision?
It's usually both. And I have this kind of idea or philosophy I call stuck at 6. I think 6 is the stickiest spot to be in, where like you don't have the pain or the suffering of like a 2 or a 3, but life isn't an 8 or a 9, but it's like good enough. It's good enough to where there's not a ton of upside if you were to make a change, but there is a lot of downside potential. And so a lot of the people I work with have felt stuck at 6. They have this vision of like what a 9 or a 10 could look like, but they're risk reward, a little bit of reward if they could make that switch, a lot of risk if it doesn't go well. But then something happens. Either their health starts to suffer, the burnout gets severe, they lose passion in maybe their 9 to 5, the demands of their family become more, something shifts to where the 6 doesn't feel like a 6 anymore. It starts to feel like a 5 and a 4, and maybe even a 3. And so the downside is a lot smaller, like it couldn't get too much worse. And now the upside is a lot bigger and a lot more compelling. And it's tough. 6 is a really sticky spot to be in. And I'm always amazed and inspired by people who like their life is pretty good and they're willing to jump out of the norm and take on all of the effort and the risk just to try to make it exceptional. But for most people, it kind of helps if things get a little bit worse to encourage you to make them better.
I mean, I totally agree. I think that through the lens of transformation, we often have to reach this breaking point where we're no longer satisfied with things continuing the way they have, and to really allow us to grab onto some dream or some vision. And I'm curious about your stuck at sixers, because I imagine a lot of our listeners can relate with that. And I certainly can remember times in my own life where I was stuck at six. Yeah, and I'm curious about some of the, maybe like just some of the experiences or some of your favorite stories from your stuck at sixers and what their own mini retirements have unlocked or helped them to step into.
Yeah, it's those things that they don't fit well in the nights and weekends. A lot of them have done a career pivot. I think, especially for my clients, they're kind of at the middle of their career. They've gained a lot of momentum. They're doing really well, but then you get to an age at 30 or 40 or 45 where you're like, am I going to do this for another 20 years? Like, is this the only thing I ever do professionally? And you have to kind of wrestle with that. There's that curiosity of, is there something better aligned out there? Is there something where I feel like I'm using my skill and my talent and my personality, versus I'm really competent in my job? And so mini retirement oftentimes gives people that space to explore things or to scale things or just reimagine their lives. It's so tough if you have any burnout. I kind of describe burnout or stress like if you're hiking through the forest. I'm in Montana, so we have a lot of forests, a lot of hiking, and we have a lot of bears. So if you start to feel like a bear on, kind of creeping in on you, your vision narrows. So you just can focus on the path ahead. Like stress's function is to move you through the stress and out into safety. And everything else that's happening in the forest is a distraction. Different career paths, cool projects, fun hobbies you could do, like all of that is a distraction that would keep you in this stressful situation. And so when people say like, well, I can't even imagine what else I would do. Of course you can't. Like your body is trying to give you this narrow vision to get you out of this situation it does not want you to stay in. And sometimes people will be like, but I'm surviving. Like you know what? I'm doing it. I'm okay. I'm keeping my head above water. But your body's helping you survive to survive the situation, to get you out of the situation. You're never going to thrive there. That's never where you were meant to live. And, so sometimes you have to get out of that stress in order for that vision to kind of widen, in order for that all to grow back and to see everything that's around you and all the possibilities.
Yeah. I'm reminded of so many things as you're sharing this. There's a book I read recently called Dopamine Nation, which talks about the addictive impact of social media and many addictions, but specifically the means of social media, and how so often we have to withdraw everything, right? Like take a hard stop or a hard pause in order to be able to intentionally reinsert what we want or what we're inspired by or what we're committed to. And in my own journey, a lot of my own journey has been in healing from workaholism, which, I think we're all addicted to something, and some of our own addictions are just socially acceptable ones, like workaholism. And I remember probably one of the most compelling things my coach ever said to me, but she was like, Kat, we're scared of creating space because of what we'll find in the space, in the middle, in the void.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just sitting with what you're sharing through that lens, because I'm imagining that for many, the mini retirement creates that artificial space or pause to really reconnect with what you want to insert or redesign on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In in a positive way and also in a challenging way. In my program, there's 4 steps, and the fourth one is navigating this journey. Assuming that a lot of people haven't done the journey many times, they don't know a ton of people who've done the journey. Kind of like, here's some things that might happen. Here's some things to kind of look out for. And one of those is unpacking baggage. Sometimes we've been running so fast from something that when we pause, we worry the avalanche might catch up to us and bury us, which was great motivation to keep running. But a lot of things can get unpacked. And I think it's important to have kind of a positive mindset around that. Like, you're giving yourself this time and the space to heal things, to deal with things, to improve these areas that have been tricky. And that's going to benefit you long term. Like, this is a benefit you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. But if you weren't expecting to unpack some baggage during the time off, it can be a little disconcerting. Like, what is happening here?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful reminder, just of the human condition to avoid change, to desire to stay within the confines of our comfort zone. And just the upside of that when our nervous systems are relaxed, when we're at rest, we are so much more resourced internally to handle change, to lean into change, to welcome change.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the 4 steps of your program, and I'm sure my audience would love to hear that, as would I. So for those of us who are considering a mini retirement, taking a month away, unplugged, away from our 9 to 5, or at least 90% away from our business, what are the steps that we need to consider?
The first one, like I've kind of touched on, is figuring out the intention, figuring out the purpose. Pick 1 or 2 or 3 things for this next mini retirement. And, my website, my podcast is called Retire Often, because I don't think people should just do one. I think this should be part of the rhythm of our lives. And so I always encourage people, especially if they've had a really busy decade, they've been pushing hard for a long time and they're like, there's 100 things I want to do. You can just slot those out over the next 5 or 10 mini retirements, but pick 1 or 2 or 3 intentions. And that's step 1, is really clarifying and figuring out what are the things that are going to be the most meaningful, what are the things that are going to add the most value. And actually on my site, I have a couple free worksheets that kind of help people sort through that first step, because that's the biggest mistake I see people make in mini retirements is they just wing it. They think, well, as long as I'm not working, it'll be amazing. And happiness is one part reducing suffering, which leaving your job might, but it's the other part is adding joy. And this isn't something that we always know how to do or we have as much practice with. So that's step 1. Step 2 is employment. And I kind of walk people through how to negotiate a month off, how to explain this mini retirement, how to prepare your business, how to explain it if you're going to do it in between jobs to your next employer, how to kind of network so that you can get a really amazing next job. And then the third step is finances, like figuring out your personal budget, figuring out how much this thing's going to cost, how to save for that, and how to set yourself up to be able to retire often, to be able to make this part of your ongoing lifestyle.
That was the third?
That's the third. So then the fourth is navigating the journey, like unpacking baggage, or like how to actually recover from burnout, how to do with friends and family and like maybe some of their confusion or their concern. Kind of all of those things that, having walked so many people through it, there's a lot of advantages and a few kind of spots people can get a little stuck in, and wanting them to, even if it's like a hard, tricky spot, to really get the most out of that. Like, if people are workaholics and all of their identity is wrapped up in that competency, it can be a tough transition to step away from that. And so giving some tools of like, how do we build out other aspects of our identity that can be meaningful for us?
I really appreciate that fourth one, because the first three, they seem like almost like what you would expect. They seem more predictable. But
Yeah.
the fourth element, I feel like that's the real kicker, and I imagine a place where many of us self-sabotage by not anticipating the potential pitfalls.
Yes.
Something in
Yes.
my work that I say a lot is anticipate and welcome breakdowns.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are perfectionists and high achievers, when we're so committed to our plans and goals going the way we intend, we can really get attacked, right? Like just taken out by those pitfalls, which happen to all of us, right? Like we can't control everything. So I really appreciate just that planning in advance of the baggage that could come up, that could and will.
Yeah. And I find, and I've seen this, this has been worked out in my one-on-one coaching, is that the story people tell themselves when they experience this is not the most helpful and not even a true story. So recovering from burnout is a really common part of step 4, in that it can be more intense than people anticipate. Physically way more intense, and it can catch people off guard, to where they're napping, they don't feel productive, they don't feel motivated, like their body kind of powers down into this deep rest mode. But the story they tell themselves is, maybe I'm lazy, maybe I'm just not productive, maybe I can't be successful outside of my 9 to 5, maybe I need that structure, maybe I'm not going to be able to thrive on my own, I guess I should just go back to work. Like this, clearly I am a disaster of a human outside of a job. And I should just stay employed until I die. When the truth and the more helpful story is, wow, I'm a lot more tired than I realized. Like my body was doing a great job getting me out of the forest. It needs a little bit more rest. I guess I should kind of switch up my plans a little bit to give my body what it needs. But that's never the story people start with.
Totally. I mean, so something that is just coming to me as you're talking is how, I mean, your whole face lights up as you talk about this. So I'm just connecting with how much joy this clearly brings to you to teach about and talk about. And I'm imagining that the work you do is really rewarding. I'm curious what maybe some of the aspects that you didn't anticipate being so rewarding are.
I think so. Maybe this is the obvious one, but it's hit me really hard. Is that I knew how transformative and how life-changing many retirements were for me. But for most people, when you look back on a decade of your life, those mini retirements are the things that pop out. That adventure you did, that self-healing, that business you built, that dream that you accomplished, like it becomes the highlight of people's decades and maybe their life. And it feels intense and sacred that like I get to be a part of the thing people love the most in their life. Like when they look back on it at 80, I had a little tiny piece of help in making that happen or making it go really well. And it kind of, it's exciting and overwhelming and wonderful.
So, are you able to share a couple of those highlights? I'm just curious, like what some of your own personal favorite success stories or
highlights that clients in their 80s are coming back and sharing with you, or you imagine they will decades from now?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of people do career pivots and move across the country and start businesses, and like just everything about where they are now is different. And it all took place, like they all point back to that time off. And I don't know, it kind of overwhelms me. And sometimes it's really big things, and sometimes it's just those little things, but for that person it is significant. I have one client right now who's recovering from burnout and has started, like I talked about, unpacking baggage. uh Sometimes she bought a course a number of years ago on like how to have healthier romantic relationships, and never had the time or energy to do it. And she was like, and now I'm working through it. And like she sent me a picture of like her journal, and it's just, those are the things that in 5 or 10 years, it's like, that's when I was able to make that change. That are really, yeah. I told one of my clients, years ago, like we have a huge lake in Montana where I live, Flathead Lake. It's like one of the biggest ones west of the Mississippi. And it has all these curves. It's like 60 miles long. And I'm like, my vision is never to throw the biggest rock to where the waves from my rock will reach all sides of this lake. My vision is I want to help 1,000 people each throw their rock in their corner of the lake. And all of those things together will reach every corner of the lake. Yeah. And I feel like this is a very tangible way for me to do that.
What do you think? What do you think it is about pursuing a mini retirement that allows reinvention to be so accessible for folks?
I think the biggest part, kind of like how you talked about doing quarterly retreats. I love doing weekends away at a hotel and doing personal ones. I have kind of a thing I do for my own kind of personal life called CEO of Your Life. And I've done that for years. And I find in those personal retreats, the questions that I ask and the answers I get on day 2 or day 3 are not the answer I would have gotten 30 minutes into thinking of the question. And this is exponentially true in a mini retirement. That vision just widens. And oftentimes people are putting themselves in new situations, if they're traveling, they're going to new places and they're meeting new people and they're having new conversations and they're getting all of this new input versus their daily life. And they have the energy and the mental bandwidth to think about it and to imagine it and to dream it. And it just gives us that opportunity to reset. And I think it gives people the confidence to pivot in whatever that looks like, whether it's in their health or their habits or professionally. It's just so easy to keep doing the same thing. But once you do a hard stop and you remove yourself from that same thing, then you can say, how do I want to go back? How do I want to go back into my life, into my habits? Maybe I can't have habits 100% like I did during my mini retirement, but it's easier to kind of take some of that good stuff that we've acquired during that time and incorporate it back into our life.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think when we take the hard pause and we can really embody those new ways of being and new habits and really connect with the felt sense of how it feels, it can be so much easier to integrate that new habit upon the return. And something I'm just really appreciating as we're talking, I often feel like the way my podcast interviews get scheduled are divinely timed. And I was sharing with you that I'm right before we clicked record that I'm taking a 2.5 week trip this week in 3 days. And I only have 4 days of the 2.5 week European trip planned, which is a little challenging for my nervous system. And I have felt called to take this trip. I don't really know why. I certainly don't know where I'm going, but I'm about to turn 40, and I've been wanting a baby moon as we navigate and prepare for our first child. And I'm just really appreciating from our conversation the invitation that this is going to be for me to take a hard pause and plan for this next chapter in my own life, right? As an entrepreneur of more than a decade, taking my first maternity leave is a very scary thing.
Yeah.
So getting clear on the objectives and the planning. I'm just appreciating how useful that will be to anticipate the breakdowns and prepare, get out ahead of them.
Yeah. Because in all of I call them challenges because people initially perceive them as challenges, but in reality, it's just opportunities for growth. And it's such important growth. And I always tell people stepping away from your career, there might be some challenges, but the reality is you have to figure these challenges out eventually, because the only alternative is dying at your desk. So you can die at your desk or you can figure out these challenges.
How do you say that with a smile across your face?
These are the only two options. And so we might as well get on it. We might as well start to sort some of this stuff out and tackle it one thing at a time, versus repressing and ignoring and trying to tunnel vision our way through this avalanche and then having it catch up with us anyway and kind of crush us at the worst possible timing.
Totally. And navigate those challenges when we're internally resourced, when we're more likely to be in a beautiful place where we're inspired, where our nervous systems are at rest, where perhaps we're connected with ourselves or spirit or nature or all the above. And just how much more, internally resourced we are to be able to navigate those questions.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's anything I haven't asked you that you have been wanting to share that feels important to say.
I always encourage people to start, just mentally open that loop, to be open to this possibility, because life might throw it at you, planned or not planned. But if you can plan it, plan early, go early, start early, start small. Oh my gosh. This is not sometimes, because many retirements can be expensive or they feel big. People want it to be perfect the first time. And I'm like, no, retire often. Start with 4 weeks, or in your case, start with 2.5 weeks. Start small, because then we can scale it up. Then we can expand on that confidence and that clarity. You'll have a better sense of what you're doing and you'll have felt the rewards. Whenever I hear people be like, I want to take a trip around the world with my kids. And I'm like, oh, what kind of traveling do you do with them? And they're like, I haven't done any. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if that's the trip I would start with. Start small and kind of grow into it. But yeah, sometimes I hear people be like, oh yeah, maybe in 5 years. Do it this year, take a month. And sometimes people will tell me, I had a CFO at an event I spoke at, was like, yeah, that's great for some 9-to-5 employees. If you work at a gas station. But I'm too important. My job's too important. I'm too hard to replace to do that. And I was like, perfect. How long would it take to hire your position? And he's like, oh, it's 6 months. And I'm like, yeah, it's really important. How long would it take to train your position? He's like, yeah, it's another 6 months. And I'm like, okay. So HR can either spend a year hoping to get someone as good as you, Or they could give you a month off. Month off's way easier, way less risk, way cheaper. Like HR is going to go with the cheap, easy option most of the time. And so knowing that you have a lot more leverage, you have a lot more agency, especially if you feel like you're really competent and add a lot of value to your job, you have more agency than maybe you imagine.
I'm just listening to this conversation, and something I'm really trying to be mindful of in my own work more often is just the topic of privilege and how it plays into some of the work that we do as coaches and leaders in the personal development space. And so I'm wondering for those of our listeners who maybe are under-resourced in their own lives, is this a possibility for those who don't benefit from some of the privilege that I do as a white woman? And how can they pursue this for themselves?
Yeah. I believe everyone deserves one opportunity in their life. In a 40, 50-year career, I think everyone, every mom, every aunt, everyone from every social class gets at least one chance to rest or to have fun or to spend time with people they love or to pursue a hobby. Like, I think it's innate to our humanity. And there are different challenges with less income, but there's also different opportunities. When the CFO was like, I think this is easy for like someone who works at a gas station, I thought in my head, do you know many people who work at gas stations? They might not have that challenge, but they have other challenges. Like I said, I've never, we went into low earning careers and we never earned. We never earned six figures. So most of my mini retirements I did while I was making $30,000 a year. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. Like that month-long coast to coast road trip with my friend where we were camping and sleeping on people's couches, because I've always been a little bit of a money nerd. I kept track in a diary of every single one of our expenses. And I paid for the whole thing. My friend just was along for the ride and to be a support. It was like $2,500. And in some ways it's a little bit easier in that there's less professional risk. When I would step away from a job where I was making $12-15 an hour, I knew I could find another one making $12 or $15 an hour. I have clients who make $300,000 a year, and they're concerned, if I step away, what if I can't go back at the same salary range? I never had that concern. There's lots of jobs where I can make $15 an hour. And honestly, when you're in that kind of demographic, I worked at Starbucks, I sold furniture, I worked at a mattress place, like nobody thinks like, oh, there's a 2-month gap in your resume. What happened there? Like nobody cares. Nobody's even really looking at your resume. As long as you're a warm body, like they're like, yes, you're hired. And so I think there's different opportunities, but you have to be a little bit more creative. Like, yeah, you're probably not going to do an around the world trip for your first one, but maybe you can do a cool hiking thing or go camping or plant some stuff in your backyard or lean into a hobby or start volunteering in your community. When we travel, we rent out our house, which a lot of my clients are like, yeah, there's no amount of money that's worth it for me. But for us, we rent it out for about $2,000 a month. And that's about what our travel costs are. So it costs us the same to live at home as it does on the road. So that is worth it for us. Like that amount of extra money is like, yeah, I'll clean out my house. I'll move my tax documents. Like I'll put my clothes under the bed, for $2,000 a month. The juice is worth the squeeze. So I think there are some unique opportunities, challenges, but there again, it's so much easier to find, a weekend or a part-time job where you might make $15-20 an hour that in a year you could save up the amount that you would need to cover a month off.
I really appreciate us ending on that note. I just hear kind of this overarching theme about the accessibility. And I totally hear you, like right out of college, I joined the Peace Corps. Now, of course, the cost of living was marginal, but still on $300 a month. And then on my first salary working in sustainable tourism at $32,000, I still saved, more at that first salary point and salary level than I've ever made since. And so I think that there's really something to be said for being intentional with our savings and how we earn and side hustles and to use your words, getting creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even it doesn't have to be a massively expensive experience. One story I love, I was in a doctor's office, and the receptionist, it was like a med spa. So she probably made in our area like $12, $15 an hour. And she was over the moon. She was like so excited. And she was like, I just came back from vacation. And I was like, really? Where did you go? She was like, well, it was my very first time on an airplane. And I had never left the state of Montana. And I went to Peru. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, and not just the cities. I went to the deepest, darkest jungles of Peru. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a Paddington Bear trip. And there again, looking back, she was probably 22. She probably, the whole trip, I imagine, pricing out maybe $2,000. I don't know if the deepest, darkest jungles of Peru are that expensive. But when she looks back on her 20s, that's going to be a highlight. That's going to be the moment when her entire life expanded to never leave the state of Montana and then go to the jungles of Peru is like mind blowing.
Well, cheers to making our next trips, our next mini retirements, my 2.5-week upcoming baby moon, the highlight of the decade. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And honestly, I wish that we had started where we ended, because I think the accessibility of our dreams is such an access point for people to dream. So I'm excited for our listeners to really listen all the way through. And as we wrap, I'd love to hear what's made the difference for you in becoming the prosperous empath that you are.
So 2 things. One life event, one tool. There again, another mini retirement. I had a mental breakdown, and I went to inpatient for a month, and it was a turning point. It was a place where I gathered so much information about who I am and how I am, and started me on an entirely different kind of self-healing path. And then one tool on that path that I really liked is I did the Hoffman process, which, years ago, but I still think about those tools. I still think about kind of the things that we talked about during that teaching.
I'm not familiar with the Hoffman process.
Oh, yeah. It's been around a long time. I had to do it online, unfortunately, because it was COVID. They still offer it online, but they do in person, like a 5-day retreat, which they're probably most known for. And it's kind of about recognizing your patterns, where you developed those patterns. What is kind of that? What are your default settings? How do you respond to situations, and being more thoughtful and more intentional of choosing how you want to respond?
Well, thoughtful and intentional are certainly 2 qualities that I'm taking from you and from our conversation today. So thank you so much for coming and for sharing your genius. And we'll, of course, link to your site and all your links in the show notes. But truly, thank you for the time. I'm leaving today inspired, excited, and grounded.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode. and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.